Coming up next on Arizona Horizons Journalists Roundtable, we'll look ahead to Monday's State of the State address from Governor Ducey, and we talk about expectations for the 2017 state legislative session, which convenes next week. The Journalists Roundtable is next on Arizona Horizon.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Arizona PBS, members of your PBS station. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to Arizona Horizons Journalists Roundtable. I'm Ted Simons. Joining us tonight, Mary Jo Pitzel of the Arizona Republic, Howard Fisher of Capital Media Services, and Aaliyah Rao of the Arizona Republic. Governor Doug Ducey is set to deliver his State of the State address on Monday. The governor expected to present his priorities for the year. Mary Jo, let's just look in the crystal ball here and see what are we expecting?
Well, first, as is pro forma with these speeches, it'll be a recitation of his accomplishments to date. So I think I'm going to get a little sheet out and mark down how many times he refers to Uber and California. But he will talk a lot, I believe, about jobs and what it takes to create jobs and attract jobs to Arizona, which goes to the issues of our tax structure. And I don't know where education is going to fit into that. That's the big, big question mark.
And the key is, look, education has to be the issue. Remember, he promised, hey, folks, you passed Prop 123. It'll be just the first step. Trust me, I am your governor. And we've been waiting and listening. And as Aaliyah pointed out, he had a committee that studied for 2 years. It came up with BUPCAS. And so we're all waiting. And I know, we've all done interviews with the governor this past week. I know when I pushed him, I said, well, what do you have in mind? Well, we're going to do something about teacher salaries, but I don't think you should look at it in terms of numbers. We have a commitment that we'll continue to do stuff. That's not going to satisfy a lot of people.
Education should be number one here, correct, Aaliyah?
And he has said, yes, and he has said it will be a priority. He's kind of alluded to something about teachers. I don't know if it's teacher salaries or some sort of money for teachers, but he's been very secretive about what else that might include. And yeah, there's a lot of people who want to know what's 456, what's next. Are we going to see, Proposition 301 tax conversations? Are we going to see full day kindergarten conversations? And we've heard nothing out of the governor's office yet.
And the governor is very careful in the words that he uses, and he has made it fairly clear in recent interviews that, he's talking about education reforms. It's not really all about money, but when he has talked about the next step, step 456, most people read into that more money.
Well, and again, the problem is, so we're putting about an approximate $300 per student in with Prop 301 over the next 10 years, which will also self-destruct in 2026, as will the Prop 301 money, which is going to self-destruct in 2021. So we're still 49th, even after all that. Now, I'm not saying that money translates to academic performance, but by the same token, if you don't have the money, there are certain things you can't do, whether it's full-day kindergarten, whether it's additional teacher aides, whether it's better classrooms, whether it's textbooks or anything like that. And that's why everyone's looking, and that's why there's a lot of talk about, well, maybe we're going to have to go around the governor and put something on the ballot.
Okay, now the idea of going around the governor, I would imagine would not sit too well with, the governor. I mean, what kind of fight are we expected to see? Do we expect to see that, especially with 301? There's talk, 301 0.6%. There's talk of pushing that to a full cent.
Or more.
That would have to go to the voters.
It would. And that's the question. I think that's a big question this year is, will somebody introduce legislation to take that to the voters this year, or will they wait? And what will Ducey do? I mean, Ducey can either sit by the wayside and let somebody else deal with it. He could fight it, or he could spearhead it if he comes forward with a plan. And nobody seems to know where he wants to go with it. And also, do we need to do it this year? President Yarborough, said today during an event that maybe we don't need to deal with it this year. Maybe we can deal with it in 2018. Maybe we can deal with it in 2020,
right.
which was shocking to a lot of people because it expires and it expires in 2021, and you have a lot of schools who depend on that funding. So can you wait that long?
And remember, that 0.6% is $600 million. It's twice as much as Prop 123 raises. So this isn't chump change here. And I think the governor's solution is, well, we're going to grow the economy and we're going to cut taxes, and somehow that'll put more money into a bigger pie and everyone will be fat and happy. You know, he bristled a little bit when I asked him today. I said, well, wait a second. We just did a 30% cut in corporate income taxes. We've cut personal income taxes. We've exempted certain corporations from taxes entirely. Well, gee, Governor, where's the beef? And he said, well, don't worry, we're headed in the right direction.
The idea of education, back to education here for a sec. K-12, the major focus. What about higher education?
Oh, higher education, well, it's certainly like on President Yarborough's radar. He said he would love to see some kind of funding to help bring down or at least hold level the cost of in-state tuition at the universities and get some relief to them. But this always comes with the caveat that, well, we got to see, though, this nasty minimum wage increase that's happened, you know, could just eat up everything that we've got, even though the state is not subject to the requirements of the $10 an hour minimum.
That
Right.
gets into the whole litigation that's, you know, going to continue in February, which is, does the fact that the contractors, the people who are caring for our elderly, are being paid $8 an hour, and now will have to be paid the enormous sum of $10 an hour, mean that Access is mandated to increase its funding. Therefore, the state has to come back with $25 to $50 million, which, according to the Speaker,
Unconstitutional because there's no revenue for
there's
it.
no revenue. Now, that, they say, eats up all the money. Now, of course, we do have a rainy day fund, but, you know, now you're down to the basic question here of, you know, is it really fair to say, you know, these people who are caring for our elderly should be paid so low?
I want to get more to the minimum wage in a second here, but is that issue something now that, and lawmakers, the governor, will they repeatedly go back and say, yeah, but, we got to, yeah, but, Prop 206?
Yeah, I mean, they are doing it already. It's kind of, you know, we have a surplus, they say, between $25 and $40 million. And there was talk about, well, maybe, you know, even though that's not much money, maybe that could go to education. And now everybody is saying, yeah, but we have to deal with Prop 206. Look what you people did, you know, and now here's the outcome, the impact, in that we're going to need all of that money to deal with this problem that you, the voters, I guess, created.
How we mentioned tax cuts, the governor has said that he will cut taxes, who knows how, who knows where, who knows why, but he will do them every year. I'm assuming this year will count as well. There was some group from Kansas that you wrote about that came in town to say, whoa, don't tread lightly here?
Right. There's sort of a think tank that sprung up in Kansas after Governor Brownback and the Republican legislature there embarked on this very ambitious effort to bring the income tax down to zero. They cut rates 25% all in one fell swoop. They exempted all small business from the income tax. And they came here to talk about what that's done to the budget and to the economy, and to point out that, you know, all the promises that, you know, as Howie said, tax cuts will bring all this economic vitality. That has not happened. At least it has not happened yet. And the very glaring subtext is, don't do it here, you know, because our governor has, just like Governor Brownback has said, you know, he wants to get that income tax, you know, as close to zero as possible.
But we're not Kansas. I know the governor likes to think of us more as a Texas, Tennessee, Florida thing, even though we don't have ports like, Florida and Texas, and God knows what Tennessee has. But I mean, the point is, whenever you bring up Kansas, we're not Kansas.
Well, we're not Kansas, but then again, we're not Texas. We don't have oil. We're not North Carolina. We don't have that high tech, which is funded by a lot of investment in universities. You know, we don't have that. You know, Florida has a lot more retirees than we've got, just bringing in sources of cash. I haven't seen a Disney World yet here, but Lord knows it's coming. But that's really the problem, is that there is something to be said that you can stimulate the economy with certain tax cuts. But again, we've got a history that's going back to Fife Symington. Now, Mary Jo and I covered Symington and watched him go through the tax cuts. You know, Janet Napolitano agreed to a 10% tax cut. And we keep waiting for that boom to happen, and it hasn't.
As far as the economy is concerned, the governor has mentioned on a number of occasions regulations, cutting regulations, streamlining regulations. How far are we going? What are we talking about here?
He said he would continue that, but he didn't give any details yet about what that might look like. And, you know, he mentions Uber and kind of that, you know, that sort of technology, Airbnb, things like that. So I think we'll see it along those same lines. But I'm not quite sure what's left to eliminate.
Will that be something that he just basically talks about in general terms, do you think?
I don't know. It might be accompanied by some executive orders that could, lift certain requirements. Governors are wont to do that, sort of appendices to their state of the state. And on the tax cut front, I mean, who knows what he's going to cut, but his goal has been the income tax, not sales tax, not insurance premium tax. But I will say that he's made very modest steps. I mean, you could argue he's moved carefully. I mean, critics will say, the state can't afford any tax cuts, but the two cuts that he has claimed under his mantle of reducing the income tax have had, a pretty small dollar amount in the big context.
But it still leaves the question, which came up today during the luncheon. We're looking at this a little backwards. We have to decide what do we want to be as a state? What services do we want? Do we want roads? We know there's $20 billion in needs on roads. Okay, do we want adequate public schools? Do we want a university system folks are proud of? Do we want a correction system that people don't get killed in? Okay, if we want those things, then we have to have a revenue source to support it. We're looking at it that's saying, well, we have $9.4 billion, and we'll fund whatever that will fund. And that may be a little backwards.
Yes, but I should point out the people that are saying that are the Democrats.
Of course.
And they're in the minority, and it was Senator Katie Hobbs who actually raised that point. And so I asked her about it afterwards, like, well, when are you going to have that discussion? And she answered her own question. She said, well, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
She doesn't see it happening with the current leadership.
What's going to happen, and how will the governor, do you think, address the Affordable Care Act and perhaps a disconnect with Washington? I don't know, kumbaya with Washington, expanded Medicare, how that affects all of this. I mean, a lot of folks are concerned about this.
He said, and he said again today, he opposes Obamacare. He wants it repealed. But then at the same time, he said that we are not going to, and he used the phrase, pull the rug out from under Arizonans. So he says he's got folks in talks with folks in Washington, that they're at the table. He wants Washington to go slowly, to be careful about how it does it, but nobody's seen quite yet how that might look and how you can do that without pulling that rug out or without financially impacting Arizona significantly.
I mean, he's squarely in the repeal, but not before you have a replacement camp. I mean, and I think you're hearing that from a lot of governors, because Obamacare, especially with Medicaid expansion, has been good for many states. I mean, there's 400,000 Arizonans who got health coverage because of Medicaid expansion. It helps the hospitals because they don't have to have such high emergency room costs, and it gives a big infusion of money to state programs. Even the money for kids care, which was so debated last session, is all tied up in this. And so you may not like the expansive government part of it, but you sure like some of the stuff that comes along with it.
How enthusiastic will he be in terms of telling Washington and the President-elect Trump to be careful, tread lightly, walk slowly?
Well, it was sort of funny because we asked him afterwards, after he'd made this pronouncement about not pulling the rug out, and I think maybe you had asked him, so have you conveyed that to our congressional delegation? And his response was, well, I'm being recorded here in the media. So
hello, Andy Biggs.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. He's in a funny position because you do have people like Biggs who were elected specifically on the promise, this will be the first thing we will do, almost pounding a shoe on the table. And now to have the governors, our governor, other governors say, well, wait a second, what exactly are you going to replace it with? Because we do have things like, prior existing conditions. We have questions about how long children should be able to stay on their parents' income. We have questions about the cost of drugs. And you can't just simply say, we're going to go back to the way it was. That is politically unacceptable.
Again, will he spend much time, do you think, on this Monday? How enthusiastic will he be about this? Or will he just basically say, be careful, let's move on to the next topic?
I don't know how much time he'll spend on it Monday. I think Monday his focus is on what he has done and what he will do in Arizona. And at this point, it's not entirely in his hands.
Right.
So I don't think we'll hear much about it in the State of the State.
One of the interesting issues that's going to come up, if not in the State of the State, is going to be front and center, goes to this issue of the minimum wage, not so much how we finance it. But lawmakers have never liked the fact that the great unwashed, meaning voters, get to make their own laws. And they've dabbled around, putting limits on it. Well, there are a couple of measures up this year to change signature requirements, make it harder to use paid circulators. Representative Michelle Ugenti-Rita has a bill to totally repeal the Voter Protection Act. Now remember, that was put in after the 1996 medical marijuana law. the legislature said, "Oh, you're too stupid. You don't understand it." Well, they came back and reenacted it and enacted the Voter Protection Act, which says to the lawmakers, hands off of what we do.
Right, and so I guarantee you we'll be talking about that as the session goes on, but it's a session in general, 30,000-foot view here. We got a new Senate President and a new Speaker of the House. Impact of those folks on the session, on the way businesses run down there.
Well, I think probably most dramatically, the House was rather chaotic for the last 2 years. You hear that, I mean, the Republican members didn't want to talk about it too publicly, but Mesnard is, practically bending over backwards to say, I'm a real different kind of leader. I'm going to be a lot more transparent.
J.D. Mesnard.
Yeah, J.D. Mesnard from Chandler, who's in his last term as a House of Representatives member. So he is, he's creating appropriations subcommittees, something that the state hasn't seen since maybe, I don't know when they went away, in the 80s, but he's sort of a student of the legislature. He's talking about caucus-driven leadership. He's going to listen to his members, and I think he's going to be a lot more available to speak for himself as well. So that's the most dramatic change. In the Senate, Yarborough, he's been in the legislature for like 15 years. The Senate is all people who are familiar with the process, except for one newcomer, Sean Bowie, who's a Democrat from Ahwatukee. So that's probably going to run pretty smoothly, but maybe not with the kind of firm grip that Andy Biggs had on his
I was going to say that Steve Yarborough, Andy Biggs, the difference there seems somewhat palpable.
Yes, and I, there was a lot of conflict. I think, but maybe not conflict, but a lot of, behind the scenes between Biggs and Ducey. Biggs very much controlled the legislature. And now I think you have Yarborough and Mesnard who are much more in line with Ducey, and I think we'll see a lot more Ducey influence at the legislature than we have in past couple of years.
Until he vetoes their first bill, perhaps.
We can't get along all the time.
As far as Rebecca Rios as House Minority Leader, Katie Hobbs remains as Senate Minority Leader. Let's talk about the impact of Democrats down there, because as the session goes on, oftentimes we don't get to hear it. We bring them on the show and we talk about what they want to see, but as you said before, they're not even expecting to be heard half the time down there.
It comes down to numbers. You need 16 senators, 31 representatives, and they don't have either. So you start off with that. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't make their will known. It's going to come down to the coalitions. I think we may see one on education. We've got people like Heather Carter talking about, we need to do something, whether it's putting something on the ballot. I think even in terms of some of the Child Protective Services stuff, we may see some coalitions there. Vouchers, things like that certain Republicans reunite with certain Democrats to block certain things. And that's where the Democrats, can have some force in terms of, when they can find enough moderate Republicans.
Will there be that moderate circle in the middle of the diagram there, from taking a little bit from both sides, to actually become a factor, do you think?
I think so. They were a factor somewhat last year, and I think the numbers are narrow enough, and a tiny bit more narrow this year, that they are a factor. I think we'll see the typical, odd bills, interesting bills, but I think that moderate coalition has some power this year.
And education is wildly popular. I mean, still 80 to 85% of kids that are in schools go to district schools. They go to public schools. So it is inconceivable that every Republican lawmaker would just overlook that and say we're just going to expand choice to the point that we're funding private school vouchers.
What about the idea, though, of higher pay to teachers, more money to districts based on student outcomes, accountability? Are we going to start hearing more about that?
Well, yes, we are. But you've got a real problem here. I mean, to the extent you say you're going to add more money to A and B rated schools, and this goes back to Jan Brewer.
Yes.
Okay, if the pie remains the same, who are we taking it away from? The schools with the most struggling students? And how does that exactly help them improve? And that becomes the issue. But that goes to why you've got the voucher people saying, that's no problem, they'll go to charter schools. We'll give them a voucher, they'll go to private and parochial schools. But the fact is that it's these schools who cannot turn away the most needy, who cannot turn away those with the most problems, who probably need the extra money.
But there are some groups working on how do you fund succeeding are excelling low-income schools, and sort of is there a model there, what's working? Because there are some of those schools, and they're not always charter schools in Arizona, that are working, and do you put the money there or in that, find the magic formula and what's working for that, and spread that throughout Arizona. And I think that was some of the classroom's first conversation.
Right.
About how and when can we do that.
And I was going to say, the governor, I would imagine, would very likely bring that up in the State of the State address, how to get more schools to act and behave and perform with the results of the better schools.
I think so. He's mentioned
Yes.
accountability. He's mentioned it's not always about, money. It's also about, looking at other data points and other things. And yeah, I think we'll see some of that.
Yeah, and I thought today he chose his words very carefully. I think he went out of his way to make the point that, we're talking about all the kids here.
Yes.
He's not, he is signaling that he doesn't want to take from the poorer districts to benefit the richer ones. But poorer ones arguably need more resources to bring these kids up to to the grade levels. So it's going to be very interesting to see. I'm really curious to see what the governor is going to propose on education.
All right, and as far as the proposal, of course, we'll have the State of the State address here starting at 5 o'clock with analysis afterwards. Very interesting to see. And then, of course, the legislature. Will it be a contentious session?
Well, I think that everyone's going to give the new leadership a chance to see how they work. As we pointed out, with people like Mesnard, who is more reasoned, I don't know how else to say it, than his predecessor. Yarborough is one of those very nice guys who will sit and talk with you at length about philosophy of government. And I think that with the exception of a few things that he has his heart tied in on, like tuition
STOs,
scholarships
yeah.
and things like that, that I'll listen. And, even when he was trying to get involved with the issue of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act and what became Senate Bill 1062, he was trying to do it in a way that he thought was reasonable. And so, to the extent that he's willing to sit down with Rebecca and with Katie, and that JD is doing the same thing, I think you can avoid that. Now, there are a few wild cards in there. You've got people like Leach and Fincham, and who are already starting to throw a few bombs in there. Let's just revamp the State Board of Education and take it away from the governor. So, yeah, there'll be some fun.
Contentious?
So far, no. I think everybody, like Howie said, is going to kind of start off on the same foot, and we'll see where they get. I mean, yeah, it'll get there. There'll be something that will split everybody, but I'm not sure if it'll be education or something else this session.
Yeah, I mean, if we get some clarity on what's happening with Obamacare, you're going to see splintering there, because what brought in Medicaid expansion to the state was a coalition,
Yes.
a bipartisan coalition. Yeah, there's always something that's going to.
Yeah.
And another point to keep in mind is that the legislature's got, I think, 24 or 26 new members. It's just they're new to the whole process. Almost all of them except one are in the House. So it's half of the Democratic caucus. They're new folks, So there's a learning curve, and some freshmen sit back and watch and learn, and others just rush headlong, and those are the ones who make for interesting stories.
Before we go, you've mentioned it a couple of times, the minimum wage fight, the
Yes.
battle here. We got a couple of minutes. Give us just a brief encapsulation of what's happening here and where we go. The raise is in effect. People are getting paid.
Raise in effect. You've got a couple of different tracks here. Number one is the lawsuit. And I know you talked to Glenn Hammer about it. Do we have a constitutional provision that says you have to have a revenue source for a mandated expense? Is this a mandated expense? State Supreme Court will take a look at that in February. The more immediate issue is this question of, since if the state is going to pay its providers more to make up for the fact that these contracts were negotiated at $8.05 an hour, where does the money come from? And as you talked to Aaliyah about the what if and just yes but, yes but, yes but. We'd love to fund education, yes but. We'd love to fund universities, yes but. And that's the more immediate question, is how do you come up with the money, and do they wait for the Supreme Court to rule?
But then, Senator Hobbs made a point today that, they're kind of are they using 206 as an excuse to say, oh, we need to fund something that we should have been funding for the past 5 years? There's a reason they're not barely making minimum wage right now, because of the contracts are so low. So, but they're low. So then what do you do?
And here's the other interesting point. All during the campaign, the chamber was telling us these are only teenagers at starting wages, and don't worry about it. And why are we worrying about that? Now they're admitting that these are the people.
Folks, yes.
There are folks who are caring for adults, caring for people in nursing homes who are making minimum wage.
Yeah, and I think it's, there's not a whole lot the legislature can do about minimum wage until they see maybe in mid-February if the Supreme Court's even going to consider the case. In the meantime, they can do a lot of, what do you call it, tearing of garments and grabbing their
Gnashing of
heads and
teeth
complaining.
everything.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
All right. Thanks a lot. Good stuff. Monday on Arizona Horizon, the 2017 state legislative session does kick off with Governor Doug Ducey's State of the State address. We will have the speech in its entirety, followed by analysis Monday at 5 here on Arizona Horizon. That's it for now. I'm Ted Simons. Thanks so much for joining us. You have a great weekend.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Arizona PBS, members of your PBS station. Thank you.
I have always said that Jackson Heights is the most diverse community in the whole world, literally.
So if I'd ask you, why do you want to be citizens of the United States, what do you say?
Tonight at 8 on Arizona PBS. When you want to be more informed, Arizona PBS delivers news and analysis with multiple perspectives, thanks to financial support from you and
The Persian Room. Travel to another world, to a land of exotic aromas and period decor for a fine dining experience. The Persian Room in North Scottsdale on Scottsdale Road, one light north of Frank Lloyd Wright Boulevard. Gourmet exotic cuisine at its best.
Ironwood Cancer and Research Centers, personalized cancer care through medical oncology, radiation oncology, and radiology services, focusing on emotional, physical, and social support, outsmarting cancer one patient at a time.
explore new ideas and new worlds here on Arizona PBS, a community service of Arizona State University.
See this patio? There used to be a motorcycle sitting there, a bike I didn't use and didn't want, so I donated it to public television, and they took care of everything. In addition to supporting my favorite programs, I earned a tax deduction. Turn something you don't need into something you really want. Contact the Vehicle Donation Program.
Coming up next on Arizona PBS, Life and World.
My child who's watching Super Y, and it said, what letter makes the sound R? And my 2-year-old is jumping up and down going, R, R, R. I love that. I wish I knew the genius that came up with Dinosaur Train. I mean, what little boy especially doesn't like dinosaurs and trains and to put them together in one show? My family does without a lot of stuff, but I would be horrified if we had to do without PBS.
Coming soon to Arizona PBS.
On Masterpiece Mystery.
This is the most dangerous, the most despicable human being that I have ever encountered.
What is this? We can't do this.
Is this supposed to be a game?
We're going to have endless fun, Mr. Holmes, aren't we?
No, not endless. This monster must be ended.
Sherlock on Masterpiece Mystery.
Sunday night at 8 on Arizona PBS.
Our world is at a crossroads. Can nuclear power provide